Marcus Williams sat in his unmarked sedan outside the convenience store, off-duty, and dressed in casual jeans and a plain gray hoodie. After 20 years on the force and 3 years as police captain, he rarely got moments like these, quiet, anonymous, just another face in the crowd. The autumn sun was setting over the small town of Millbrook as he walked toward the entrance. He'd stopped to grab some milk on his way home, wanting nothing more than a peaceful evening with his wife and daughter, when he heard it. "Hey. You." Marcus turned to see a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit striding toward him with aggressive purpose. His face was flushed red, twisted with anger. Marcus recognized the type immediately. 20 years of police work had given him a sixth sense for trouble. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked calmly, his training kicking in automatically. "Yeah, you can get the hell out of this neighborhood," the man spat, stopping just a few feet away. His name was Richard Thornton, though Marcus didn't know that yet. "We don't want your kind around here, causing problems." Marcus felt the familiar weight of exhaustion that came with such encounters. Even after everything he'd accomplished, the commendations, the promotions, the lives saved, there were still people who saw only his skin color. "I'm just here to buy milk," Marcus replied evenly, keeping his voice neutral. "I'm not causing any problems." Richard stepped closer, his voice rising. A few people in the parking lot had begun to notice. "Don't give me that. I've seen you driving around here, casing houses probably. I know what you people are up to." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police. Let them deal with you." Marcus could have ended it right there. Could have pulled out his badge, could have identified himself. But something made him pause. He wanted to see how far this would go, how the system he'd dedicated his life to would respond. "Go ahead," Marcus said quietly. "Call them." Richard's face reddened further at what he perceived as defiance. "You think you're tough? You think this is your neighborhood?" He jabbed a finger toward Marcus's chest, not quite touching him but close enough to be threatening. "People like you are ruining this town. Coming in here, bringing crime, bringing drugs." "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step back," Marcus interrupted, his captain's voice emerging despite himself. "Don't tell me what to do," Richard shouted. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Some were filming on their phones. "I have every right to be here. I own property in this town. I pay taxes. What do you contribute, huh?" A store employee had come outside, a young white woman in her early 20s named Sarah. "Mr. Thornton, please, you need to calm down. Stay out of this, Sarah." Richard barked without taking his eyes off Marcus. "Sir, I know him," Sarah tried again, her voice shaking. She'd seen Marcus come in a few times, had noticed the police radio in his car. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Richard cut her off. "Go back inside before you get yourself in trouble." The sound of sirens cut through the tension. 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing. 4 officers emerged, and Marcus recognized them all: Officers Chen, Rodriguez, Patterson, and Johnson. They were good cops, people he'd trained himself. Officer Chen approached first, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly when he recognized Marcus. But he was professional enough not to show it fully. "What seems to be the problem here?" Chen asked, looking between the 2 men. Richard launched into his story immediately. "This man has been lurking around the neighborhood for weeks. I've seen him driving slowly past houses, clearly up to no good. When I confronted him, he became aggressive and refused to leave. I want him arrested for trespassing and threatening behavior." Chen turned to Marcus, who simply stood there with his arms relaxed at his sides, his expression neutral. "Sir, do you have any identification?" "I do," Marcus replied calmly. "Can I see it, please?" Marcus reached slowly into his back pocket, making sure his movements were clear and visible, the way he'd taught countless citizens to do during traffic stops. He pulled out his wallet and handed it to Chen. Officer Chen opened it, and his face went pale. Inside was Marcus's badge and police ID, Captain Marcus Williams, Commanding Officer, Millbrook Police Department. Chen looked up at Marcus, then at Richard, then back at Marcus. The other officers had crowded around to look, and their reactions ranged from barely suppressed shock to obvious discomfort. "Captain," Chen said quietly, his voice apologetic. "I'm so sorry, sir." "We didn't. You did exactly what you should have done, Officer Chen," Marcus interrupted him, his voice still calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "You responded to a call, you assessed the situation, and you asked for identification. That's the protocol." Richard had been watching this exchange with growing confusion. What's going on?" Officer Rodriguez turned to him, her expression now cold. "Mr. Thornton, do you know who this man is?" "I don't care who this is Captain Marcus Williams," Rodriguez said flatly. "He's the commanding officer of this entire police department. He's everyone's boss here, including the chief's." The color drained from Richard's face in an instant. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The phone he'd been clutching slipped slightly in his suddenly sweaty hand. That's impossible," he stammered. "He can't be. I mean, he doesn't look like what, Mr. Thornton?" Marcus asked quietly, finally allowing a hint of steel to enter his voice. What exactly doesn't he look like? Richard's eyes darted around desperately, looking for escape, for support, for anything. The crowd that had gathered was now filming openly, and his panic increased as he realized how this would look. I thought. Richard was practically hyperventilating now. If I had known who you were, if you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently? Marcus interrupted. But the question is, Mr. Thornton, why didn't you treat me with respect from the beginning? What exactly did I do that warranted your hostility? Marcus took a step forward, and Richard instinctively stepped back. But Marcus's voice remained level, controlled, the voice of a man who dealt with far worse than this. Let me tell you what I saw tonight, Mr. Thornton. I saw a man who made assumptions based solely on the color of my skin. I saw a man who felt entitled to harass another person in a public place. I saw a man who used aggressive body language and threatening behavior. He paused. If someone had done that to you, what would you want the police to do? Richard's mouth worked soundlessly. Sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. I could have you arrested right now, Marcus continued. Harassment, disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct. Officer Chen, what did you observe when you arrived? Chen straightened. Sir, I observed Mr. Thornton behaving in an aggressive manner, standing in a threatening posture, with raised voice and agitated demeanor. And if this situation had been reversed, if I had been the one behaving that way toward Mr. Thornton, what would the appropriate response be? Arrest, sir, Chen replied without hesitation. Marcus nodded slowly, letting that sink in. Richard looked like he might be sick. Please, Richard finally managed to choke out. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Please, I have a family, a business. Marcus stood there for a long moment, studying the man in front of him. He'd seen this transformation before, the moment when someone's prejudices came crashing down, when they realized there might be consequences for their actions. But he'd learned long ago that fear of consequences wasn't the same as genuine change. Mr. Thornton, Marcus said finally, I'm not going to arrest you tonight. Relief flooded Richard's face, but Marcus held up a hand. However, you need to understand something. I've been a police officer for 20 years. I've saved lives, white lives, black lives, every kind of life. I've put criminals behind bars. I've protected this community. And yet, despite all of that, despite the uniform I've earned, the badge I carry, the rank I've achieved through hard work and dedication, to you, I was just another black man who didn't belong. Marcus's voice remained steady, but there was a weight to his words that made everyone in the parking lot stand a little quieter. That's the reality I live with every day, Mr. Thornton. That's the reality thousands of black men and women live with every day. We have to be twice as good, twice as educated, twice as accomplished just to be seen as equal. And even then, it's not always enough. Richard stood there, his earlier bravado completely deflated. I truly am sorry. I don't know what else to say. Here's what you're going to do, Marcus said. First, you're going to apologize to Sarah here, who tried to intervene and whom you dismissed. Then you're going to take a long, hard look at yourself and ask why you felt entitled to treat another human being that way. I will. I promise, I will. I'm not finished, Marcus continued. Third, you're going to remember this moment. Remember how it felt to realize you were wrong, to realize your assumptions were false. And the next time you see someone who doesn't look like you, someone you might be tempted to judge, remember that they might be a police captain. Or a doctor. Or a teacher. Or a veteran. Or just a good person trying to buy milk. And even if they're none of those things, they still deserve basic human respect. Sarah had been standing off to the side, tears streaming down her face. Captain Williams, I tried to tell him. I'm so sorry this happened. Marcus turned to her with a gentle smile, the first warmth he'd shown since the confrontation began. Sarah, you did nothing wrong. You tried to de-escalate the situation. That took courage, and I appreciate it. He turned back to Richard. Mr. Thornton, I want you to know something. I see this incident as a teaching moment, not just for you, but for everyone here. He gestured to the crowd that had gathered. We're all part of this community, and we all have to do better. Richard nodded, still unable to meet Marcus's eyes. Thank you, Captain. Thank you for not arresting me. For giving me a chance to be better. Don't thank me, Marcus said quietly. Thank the badge I wear, which represents justice and fairness, values I actually believe in, even when they're not extended to me. But understand this, if I hear of you treating anyone else this way, badge or no badge, there will be consequences. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. Captain, we'll need to file a report on this incident. Agreed, Marcus nodded. Make sure everything is documented, including the witness statements. He looked at the phone still recording. I'm sure there's plenty of video evidence as well. By the next morning, the videos had spread across social media. Multiple angles of the confrontation, including Richard's aggressive behavior and his reaction when he learned Marcus's identity, had been viewed millions of times. The comments sections were ablaze. This is what systemic racism looks like. Respect to Captain Williams for handling that with such dignity. The sad thing is, this happens every day to people who aren't police captains. Mr. Thornton only felt bad because he got caught. He'd have been fine if Marcus was just a regular guy. Marcus sat in his office the next day, reading through the news articles. The phone had been ringing non-stop, interview requests from national news outlets, messages of support from community members, and surprisingly, a few messages from other black officers around the country sharing their own similar experiences. There was a knock on his door. "Come in," Marcus called. Chief Patricia Morrison entered, a white woman in her late 50s who'd been chief for the past 5 years. She closed the door behind her and took a seat across from Marcus's desk. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I've been better. But I've also been worse. I've been fielding calls all morning. The mayor wants to meet with you. So does the city council. There are protesters outside City Hall, some supporting you, some supporting Thornton, believe it or not." "Of course there are," Marcus said tiredly. "The department stands with you, Marcus. You know that, right? What happened was unacceptable. I appreciate that, Chief. But we both know this isn't really about me." That afternoon, Marcus stood at a podium in front of City Hall, facing a sea of reporters and cameras. Chief Morrison stood beside him, along with several community leaders. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the crowd. "I want to address what happened yesterday evening, not because I seek attention, but because I believe this incident can serve a greater purpose." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What happened to me happens to Black Americans every day, in every city, in every town across this country. The difference is, I had a badge to fall back on. I had a position of authority that eventually commanded respect. But what about the young black man who's just walking home? What about the black woman who's just shopping in her own neighborhood? They don't have a badge. They just have their humanity, and that should be enough." The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. "I've dedicated my life to serving and protecting this community, all of it, regardless of race, religion, or background. I've worked alongside officers of every ethnicity, and I've seen the best of what law enforcement can be. But I've also lived the reality of what it means to be a black man in America, even with this badge. Yesterday, Mr. Thornton made assumptions about me based on the color of my skin. He saw a threat where there was none. He saw a criminal where there was only a man buying milk. I chose not to arrest him because I believe in redemption. I believe people can learn and change. But I also want to be clear, this behavior is unacceptable and there must be accountability." Later that week, Richard Thornton requested a meeting with Marcus. They sat in a private room at the police station, with Chief Morrison present as a witness. Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years in those few days. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual confident demeanor had been replaced by visible anxiety. "Captain Williams, Chief Morrison, thank you for seeing me," Richard began, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted to speak with you in person, not through lawyers or PR statements." Marcus remained silent, waiting. "I've spent the last few days thinking about what you said. About who I am, about what I did. And I've had to face some ugly truths about myself." Richard's hands trembled as he spoke. "I was raised in a household where certain beliefs were normalized. I never questioned them. I surrounded myself with people who thought like me, lived like me. And I convinced myself that I wasn't racist because I never used certain words or belonged to certain groups. But racism isn't just about slurs or violence," Marcus said quietly. "It's about the assumptions we make, the respect we withhold, the dignity we deny." "I understand that now," Richard said, tears welling in his eyes. "I've started meeting with a counselor who specializes in helping people recognize and address their prejudices. I've reached out to the NAACP to ask how I can contribute meaningfully to change, not just throw money at the problem." "That's a start," Marcus acknowledged. "But understand, Mr. Thornton, this isn't about making yourself feel better. This is about recognizing the harm your actions, and the actions of people like you, cause every single day." I know that now." Richard wiped his eyes. "I have a daughter, Captain. She's 16. When she saw those videos, she asked me, 'Dad, is that who you really are?' I didn't have an answer. I couldn't look her in the eye." In the weeks that followed, Millbrook became an unexpected focal point for conversations about race and justice. The incident had sparked something, uncomfortable, necessary conversations that had been avoided for too long. Marcus found himself speaking at town halls, at schools, at community centers. He didn't want to become a spokesperson or a symbol, but he recognized the opportunity to create real dialogue. At one high school assembly, a young black student raised his hand. "Captain Williams, do you ever get scared? When stuff like this happens?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I'd be lying if I said no. Every black parent in America has had to have the talk with their children, about how to behave around police, about how to stay safe, about how the world might perceive you differently because of your skin color. I had that talk with my own daughter. And yes, even with everything I've achieved, I still feel that fear sometimes. But I also have hope," he continued. "Because I see young people like you asking these questions, wanting to understand, wanting to do better than previous generations. Change is slow, but it is possible. A white student raised her hand next. What can we do? Those of us who are white. I don't want to be like Mr. Thornton, but I'm scared of making mistakes. The first step is listening, Marcus replied. Listen to the experiences of people who don't look like you. Believe them when they tell you about their realities. And when you see injustice, speak up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you something. That's what Sarah did in the parking lot that day. She tried to intervene, even though she was scared. 3 months after the incident, Richard Thornton stood before the city council, requesting permission to establish a community program. I want to create a series of workshops, he explained, his voice steadier now but still humble. I've partnered with local religious leaders, educators, and yes, Captain Williams, to develop programming that addresses implicit bias, racial justice, and community building. I'm funding this entirely myself, he continued. It's not about publicity or redemption. It's about doing the actual work of change. I've been attending similar workshops in other cities, listening to voices I never made space for before. Marcus sat in the audience, watching. He'd been skeptical when Richard first approached him with the idea, but over the past months, he'd seen something shift in the man. It wasn't dramatic or performative, it was the quiet, steady work of someone genuinely trying to do better. After the meeting, Richard approached Marcus carefully. Captain, I wanted to thank you. The council approved the program. Don't thank me yet, Marcus replied. Talk is easy. Let's see if you follow through. I will. I promise you, I will. Richard hesitated, then continued, I know I can't undo what I did. I can't erase the harm. But I can try to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Marcus studied him for a moment. You know what I think, Mr. Thornton? I think the real measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, we all do. It's what they do after. Whether they learn. Whether they change. Whether they use their privilege and position to make things better, not just for themselves, but for everyone. I'm trying, Richard said simply. Keep trying, Marcus replied. Every day. That's all any of us can do. The incident continued to have ripple effects throughout Millbrook and beyond. The police department implemented new training protocols on implicit bias and community relations. Officer Chen, Rodriguez, and the others who'd responded that night spoke openly about what they'd learned from the experience. It made me think about every call I respond to, Officer Chen admitted during a departmental training session. About the assumptions I might be making, about how my own biases might affect my judgment. Seeing how Mr. Thornton treated the captain, someone who's taught me everything I know about being a good cop, it really drove home how insidious this problem is. Sarah, the store clerk, had been invited to speak at several community events about the importance of bystander intervention. I was scared, she told audiences. But I knew if I didn't say something, if I didn't try to help, I'd regret it. We all have a responsibility to speak up when we see something wrong. The convenience store where it all happened became an unlikely site of reflection. The owner, a Korean-American man named Mr. Kim, installed a small plaque near the entrance, a place where difficult truths were spoken. May we all strive to see the humanity in one another? On a quiet Sunday evening, Marcus sat on his back porch with his wife, Angela, and their 16-year-old daughter, Maya. They'd avoided talking about the incident at length, wanting to let the initial chaos settle before processing it as a family. Dad, Maya said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. Can I ask you something? Always, sweetheart. Why didn't you just show him your badge right away? You could have ended it immediately. Marcus set down his coffee, considering his answer. I suppose I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted him to treat me like a human being, not because I had authority or power, but just because. I'm a human being. Does that make sense? It does, Maya said softly. But wasn't it dangerous? What if it had escalated? It could have, Marcus admitted. And maybe it was foolish. But sometimes you have to put yourself in uncomfortable positions to expose uncomfortable truths. That man needed to see his own prejudices reflected back at him. Angela reached over and squeezed her husband's hand. I was terrified when I saw those videos. All I could think was, what if it had gone differently? What if those officers hadn't been from your department? I know, Marcus said quietly. I'm sorry I put you through that worry. Don't apologize for existing in the world as a black man, Angela replied firmly. That's not your burden to carry. The burden belongs to people like Richard Thornton who need to do better. Maya leaned her head on her father's shoulder. I'm proud of you, Dad. For how you handled it. For not letting anger make you someone you're not. Oh, I was angry, Marcus assured her. I'm still angry. But anger without purpose is just destruction. I wanted to turn that moment into something meaningful. A year after the incident, Millbrook held its first Unity Festival, a community-wide event celebrating diversity and promoting dialogue. Richard Thornton's workshop program had expanded to schools throughout the county. Marcus had been promoted to deputy chief, with strong support from both the department and the community. At the festival, Marcus stood on stage, looking out at thousands of faces, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, young, old, all gathered together. A year ago, he began, I was confronted in a parking lot by someone who made assumptions about who I was based on the color of my skin. That moment was painful. It was frustrating. But it also became a catalyst for change in our community. He paused, spotting Richard in the crowd, who was volunteering at one of the workshop tents. Today, I want to talk not about that confrontation, but about what's happened since. I've seen people who've never had difficult conversations about race sit down and listen to each other. I've seen young people demand better from their communities and their leaders. I've seen individuals confront their own biases and commit to doing better. But I also want to be honest, we're not finished. This isn't a problem we solve in a year or even a decade. Every day, somewhere in this country, someone is judged by their skin color rather than their character. Every day, someone is denied dignity, respect, or opportunity because of who they are. The work continues. It has to. Because every person deserves to walk into a convenience store to buy milk without being harassed. Every person deserves to exist in public spaces without being profiled. Every person deserves to be seen as an individual, not a stereotype. The crowd erupted in applause. As the sun set on the festival, Marcus walked through the various tents and booths. He stopped at Richard's workshop station, where a diverse group of teenagers were engaged in a heated but respectful discussion about racial justice. Richard noticed him and stepped away for a moment. Deputy Chief Williams, thank you for coming. How's it going? Marcus asked, nodding toward the group. Good. Really good, actually. These kids are smart, they call me out when I'm wrong, they push back on easy answers. It's humbling. That's how it should be, Marcus said. They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the festival goers pass by. Can I tell you something? Richard asked quietly. That night in the parking lot, it was the worst moment of my life. But it was also the moment I needed. I was living my entire life with blinders on, and you forced me to see. I didn't force anything, Marcus replied. You did that yourself. When faced with your own actions, you had a choice, double down or do better. You chose to do better. That's on you. Still, I want you to know, I'll never forget that moment. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make sure others don't have to learn that lesson the way I did. Marcus nodded. That's all any of us can ask for. Not perfection. Just commitment to growth. As they parted ways, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness exactly, forgiveness was a complicated thing when it came to systemic injustice. But perhaps something like hope. Hope that people could change. Hope that communities could heal. Hope that, slowly, painfully, one confrontation at a time, the world could become a little more. Just 2 years later, Marcus stood in his new office as police chief of Millbrook. Chief Morrison had retired, recommending Marcus as her successor, and the appointment had been unanimous. His wall hung several commendations and awards, but also a photo from that night in the parking lot, not the confrontation itself, but a picture taken at the Unity Festival. In it, he stood with Richard, Sarah, officers Chen and Rodriguez, and dozens of community members, all holding hands in a circle. It reminded him that change was messy and imperfect, but possible. His daughter Maya was now in college, studying criminal justice and social work. She wanted to reform the system from within, inspired by her father's example. Richard's workshop program had expanded to 12 counties and was being replicated in other states. He'd become an unlikely but effective advocate for racial justice education, and Marcus? He still faced moments of prejudice, still had to prove himself in ways his white counterparts didn't. But he also saw progress, in the young officers he trained, in the community partnerships he built, in the difficult conversations that were now happening openly. One evening, as he was leaving the station, a young black officer stopped him. Chief, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you do it? How do you keep showing up, keep serving, when you know there are people out there who'll never see past your skin color? Marcus smiled, the question bringing him back to that parking lot, to that moment of choice. Because for every person who can't see past my skin color, there are 10 more who can. Because change is slow, but it's real. And because someone has to be in the room, wearing the badge, sitting at the table, making the decisions. If not me, then who? The young officer nodded, understanding dawning on his face. Besides, Marcus added with a slight grin, sometimes all you're trying to do is buy milk, and you accidentally start a movement. They both laughed, and Marcus headed home to his family, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities to make his community, and the world, a little bit better. Author's note. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real events that happen to Black Americans every day. While Captain Marcus Williams is a fictional character, his experiences reflect the lived reality of countless people who face racial profiling and discrimination regardless of their accomplishments or positions. The purpose of this story is not just to entertain, but to provoke thought, encourage empathy, and inspire action toward a more just and equitable society.